This is a well-known doctor that is beloved by the community, by his friends.
This was shocking.
This is a straight-up, cold-blooded murder.
She had been pressuring him to marry her, and he didn't want to have anything to do with that.
He started receiving nasty text messages.
He tells us that she has an ex-boyfriend, and he was extremely jealous.
He wanted revenge.
Is this real? Every time the detectives went back and talked to her, she had a different name.
Who is it?
Why was he targeted?
This was a gigantic whodunit.
Every day in North America, dozens of people are murdered. The key to solving the toughest of these homicides lies in the final 24 hours of the victim's life. To crack the case, detectives must reconstruct that critical timeline. The minutes and hours containing evidence that can help unlock the mystery and catch the killer.
Lubbock, Texas is a vibrant community, home to Texas Tech University and a very lively music scene where people from all over come and just kind of experience Lubbock.
It's driven by its people. It's tremendous people that will do anything for you at any time. And so it's rare to have a violent crime.
That would all change in July of 2012 when one of the more affluent parts of the city becomes the backdrop of a very violent, shocking crime.
911, what's your emergency? I need somebody at 4603 21st. A door's been broken into. There's a bullet laying on the ground.
The caller is a coworker of the victim.
When he hadn't shown up for work, she got concerned, and she went over to the house.
She finds blood on the floor of a house, and she follows that blood trail to the garage where she finds a body.
All right, the person that's with you is... Ma'am, what's going on?
The victim in the case is Dr. Joseph Saunier.
Dr. Saunier lived on his own. He was 57 years old and the chief pathologist for Covenant Medical Center.
He is very well known in the medical community and is beloved by his friends.
Police respond to Dr. Saunier's home.
Zach Johnson's assigned the case. He's a 15-year veteran of the Lubbock Police Department.
It's a normal working day for me, and I'm on homicide call. So when patrol realizes that there is, in fact, a suspicious
Neighborhood. I mean, this was shocking.
at the scene, Dr. Saunier is laying face down on the garage floor. There's blood surrounding his body. There are several gunshot wounds and stab wounds to his body. And there is copious amounts of blood, which is now congealed on the floor of the garage.
Investigators move inside the home to begin processing the scene.
In the living room, we see eyeglasses on the floor. There's a big bay window that is pushed in. There's a chair that's overturned. There's a whiskey tumbler overturned. And we find shell casings on the floor of the living room.
There's multiple blood drops that lead from the living room area directly into the garage. And one thing we see in the living room was a plastic bottle that had had the end of it either cut out or torn out or something of that nature. The plastic bottle raised some interest. It appeared to have some type of gunshot residue on one end of it.
What I immediately thought of was this is a cheap man's silencer. Somebody did not want anybody to know that they had fired shots. So the question is, what happened? The thing that immediately stands out to me is that big bay window that's been pushed in. And there is a footprint in the garden outside of the home.
Investigators posit a theory of what likely transpired.
Somebody entered through that big window.
Dr. Saunier drops his drinking glass.
They fired several shots.
And then probably knocks over the chair, trying to get out of the situation, trying to run to safety. In the meantime, drops his eyeglasses. Well, I think it was Dr. Saunier trying to escape.
The trail of blood that is leading from that area to the garage would tell me as an investigator, he's trying to get out of the house. He's trying to get away from this shooter. and he collapses inside the garage.
Since Dr. Sonnier was still alive, investigators surmised the killer followed him to the garage and stabbed him to death.
What the medical examiner learned through the autopsy was that Dr. Sonnier had been shot 5 separate times and that he had been stabbed 11 times.
To solve the crime, police need to piece together the last 24 hours of Joseph Sonnier's life.
Dr. Sonnier worked for Covenant Medical Center here in Lubbock.
So we start talking to co-workers.
And they find out that Dr. Joseph Sonnier,
A clock at night, and we also know from his security at home that he arrived approximately 7:15 p.m.
Dr. Sonnier pours himself a drink in the living room and is murdered.
And the next day, on July 11th, his bloody body is discovered just before 2 p.m.
The medical examiner establishes the time of death to be sometime the evening before 7:15 p.m. to around 10 p.m.
Police now have to determine who was responsible and why they did it.
Dr. Sonnier's murder was a mystery. It was a big whodunit. He was well-loved, well-liked. So, the news of his killing was just shocking to a lot of people.
People in the neighborhood are pretty scared. The last person they thought they would see murdered is Dr. Sonnier.
Investigators ponder the motive.
My first instinct, it's a robbery. It's a burglary. It's a burglary gone bad. That's my first instinct.
But when police look around the house, they find nothing of value missing.
There's nothing disturbed in the house other than our immediate crime scene. The only thing that was stolen in that house was Dr. Sonnier's life. This is not a burglary gone wrong. This is a straight-up, cold-blooded murder. They wanted to be sure that Dr. Sonnier was killed.
Police suspect the type of firearm used may be a clue to the killer's identity.
We determined that the casings came from a .25 caliber handgun. Why are we using a very small caliber handgun to commit a murder? There's a whole bunch of larger caliber handguns that will do the job with less ammunition.
A .25 caliber handgun would be appealing to an offender because they're easily concealed, they're not particularly loud, and the recoil is minimal, and they can control the weapon comparatively well.
And so I have to consider a female perpetrator. She can secret this gun inside a purse and use it with a huge amount of surprise.
But whether male or female, who would want to kill Dr. Sonnier? Investigators look into his family life, which wasn't idyllic.
Dr. Sonnier was married for 26 years, and the marriage ended in divorce.
But that marriage also produced 2 sons, who are now in their 20s.
When we talk to the sons, they're beside themselves, they're shocked, they're in a state of disbelief. They have no idea what has happened.
What made this tragedy doubly bad was that the sons of Dr. Sonnier had lost their mom to a homicide almost here and just never expect.
Police wonder, could their parents' murders be connected?
Certainly that's something that you think, are the 2 murders linked in any form or fashion?
It's a very unique situation. We've got 2 homicides that occurred very close to each other in the same family.
Lubbock, Texas police suspect there may be a connection between Dr. Sonnier's murder and the slaying of his ex-wife 2 years earlier.
When it's learned that Dr. Sonnier's ex-wife had been murdered in the past few years, this clearly raises questions. Is the same perpetrator involved? Is there a link here between these 2 cases?
So when detectives started looking at the relationship and the murder of Dr. Sonnier's ex-wife, they quickly learned that she had remarried after divorcing Dr. Sonnier, and her husband at the time shot her and actually took his own life.
It was a murder-suicide, and so it was restricted to that particular relationship.
So that theory, as far as those 2 cases may be linked, was quickly dismissed.
So why is our victim a victim? Why did they end up dead?
We're going to delve very quickly into his personal life to determine whether or not anybody has a motive to harm Dr. Sonnier.
His sons reveal that before he was murdered, Dr. Sonnier was enjoying being single again.
After Dr. Sonnier got divorced, he started dating women, and at the time that he was killed, he was dating a woman by the name of Rochelle Shatina.
Lead investigator Zach Johnson reaches out to Rochelle, who agrees to an interview at police headquarters.
Ma'am, if you will please state your name.
Rochelle Shatina.
She's a divorcee and has 4 teenage sons.
Rochelle Shatina and Dr. Joseph Sonnier met at a local ballroom dancing studio and hit it off.
So they had been dating about 10 months, and as a 50th birthday present, he says, hey, let's go off to Paris and celebrate your 50th. And so they had just come back from there.
He is the love of my life, and we're planning on spending our lives together.
Dr. Sonnier was the focus of Rochelle's world. Everything on social media is Dr. Sonnier and Rochelle. Pictures and pictures and pictures of their life together, of their time in Paris and just being together.
So when the detectives were questioning Rochelle, she was able to very quickly to give her whereabouts, to give a very detailed description of where she was during the times that were important to the detectives.
The day the murder happens, Dr. Sonnier meets Rochelle for lunch at 1 p.m. and then returns to work.
After lunch, they went their separate ways, and we know that
The Covenant Medical Center, it was about a 4-minute drive from his home. We know he got home around 7:15.
He was supposed to call me, and he didn't. And I sent him a text message at, I can tell you exactly what time.
Rochelle texts Dr. Sonnier at approximately 10:32 p.m. and doesn't get a reply from him. So we kind of have the very beginnings of a framework of time where this murder occurred.
Rochelle's account confirms what medical examiners suspected. Dr. Sonnier was likely killed on July 10th, between 7:15 and 10:30 p.m.
We push on with Rochelle and with the interview, and I just ask her,
Is there anybody that you can think of that may have a reason to harm him or do anything like this?
and she brings up an ex-girlfriend of Dr. Sonnier's. Her name is Sharon, and she's an emergency room nurse.
Dr. Sonnier.
Short time, and when Dr. Sonnier ended that relationship, Sharon was very angry.
Is it possible that Dr. Sonnier's ex-girlfriend, Sharon, was enraged enough to kill him?
Police want to look closely at ex-partners, ex-lovers, because a jilted lover may seek vengeance, and that can lead to violence.
I'm thinking we have a crime of passion. This is a very cruel and brutal murder. This person wanted to know that Dr. Sonnier was dead.
This is not random with this level of violence to it.
It's very important to investigators because it helps us to determine the mindset of the killer at the time of this murder.
And investigators learned that Sharon had a hard time taking no for an answer.
And during the relationship with Dr. Sonnier, Sharon wanted to make it exclusive. Dr. Sonnier didn't.
We discover that Sharon, she's pressuring him, and he was like, I don't want an exclusive relationship. I want to end the relationship.
He split up with her, and she has called and called and called to the point where he's had to hang it up or had to turn off the ringer.
Sharon got very spiteful and sent some very vindictive, hateful text messages to Dr. Sonnier.
You know, calling him asshole and, you know, you're such a.
She was not happy at all. You know, I'm the only one. I don't want you to see any other girls. The nasty text messages to Dr. Sonnier is alarming because it shows that there is unfinished business there.
Joseph said that she was crazy.
Lubbock, Texas police catch up with Dr. Sonnier's ex-girlfriend Sharon, a nurse, to find out if she had anything to do with his murder.
Detectives learn that Sharon is in Austin around the time of death of Dr. Sonnier.
Austin is a 6-hour drive from Dr. Sonnier's home in Lubbock.
So she was eliminated as a suspect.
Back Back at Lubbock Police Headquarters, Dr. Sonier's most recent girlfriend, Rochelle Shatina, continues to cooperate with investigators.
I ask her, is there anybody else that you know of that would want to harm Dr. Sonier? She says yes. My ex-boyfriend.
His name is Dr. Thomas Michael Dixon. He's the plastic surgeon in Amarillo.
That was important information to us. She has an ex-boyfriend, a guy named Mike Dixon, who's a doctor in Amarillo. That's the first time detectives hear his name as a potential person who may have an interest in seeing Dr. Sonier out of the way.
And I have his phone number if you'd like.
That would be wonderful.
She tells us that Mike Dixon is not a very nice person, very hateful, very vindictive, very dishonest.
He can be mean-spirited.
Okay.
Dr. Dixon didn't take the breakup very well.
A year and a half earlier, it had been love at first sight.
Mike Dixon and her first met when she had gone to his clinic for Botox injections. She started dating him at that time.
But Dr. Dixon was also married, and despite promising for 18 months to leave his wife, he never does.
Rochelle tells me as this relationship goes on, he really doesn't invest in her. And she picks up on this pretty quickly. And she took a lot of offense from Dr. Dixon. And she finally said, I'm done. I'm through with this relationship.
For Dr. Dixon, it goes from bad to worse. His wife discovers the affair and leaves him.
And then Rochelle Shatina did mention to investigators that at some point Dr. Dixon finds out that she's dating another doctor in Lubbock.
Mike Dixon did not take that very well. He had even said that Rochelle could continue to see Dr. Sonier if she would see him too.
So he wanted you to see him on the side, basically.
He wanted me to come back to him. I didn't know.
She is very much in love with Dr. Sonier. Rochelle tells Dr. Dixon, I am not coming back to you now or ever. And he is just livid.
Rochelle also mentions that before Dr. Sonier was murdered, she suspected she was being stalked. She remembers one morning at the gym very clearly.
I'd gone in to work out. There was this big, creepy-looking guy sitting there, like he was looking for someone or watching someone, not like calling somebody, like talking into it. And he creeped me out, so I left.
Rochelle also tells us that one time, around the time of Dr. Sonier's death, they were in Dr. Sonier's house, and they saw a flash from out on the back patio.
At the time, Rochelle thought the camera flash may have been related to her suspected parking lot stalker, but now she's not so sure.
She tells us that she couldn't help but wonder whether or not that situation with the flash related somehow to the death of Dr. Sonier.
Was Dr. Dixon so obsessed with Rochelle that he spied on her and Dr. Sonier?
Obsessive jealousy is really when we are just so fixated on a previous partner, it becomes all-consuming. That's also a high-risk time for a violent act or incident to occur.
Is it possible Dr. Michael Dixon killed Dr. Sonier in a jealous rage? To find out, Lubbock investigators drive 2 hours north to Dr. Dixon's home in Amarillo to ask him in person.
So we go up to Amarillo and we talk to Dr. Dixon. And Dr. Dixon is very open about everything.
Dr. Dixon admits he was cheating on his wife with Rochelle.
He tells me that he was in love with Rochelle, that he was very sad that the relationship was over, and that he had actually lost his marriage over that relationship when his wife discovered it. He says the whole reason for the breakup with Rochelle was because she was pressuring him to get married. She wasn't going to mess with somebody that wasn't going to, commit to her.
Investigators ask Dr. Dixon point blank, did he murder Dr. Sonier?
Dr. Dixon tells detectives that he had nothing to do with the murder that took place in Lubbock.
He's moved on from Rochelle. He is dating a medical student named Ashley. He allows us to photograph him, to check him for defensive wounds, to check him for any evidence of physical altercation. He even provides us a DNA sample right there. So he is being more than cooperative. But inevitably, I ask him, can you account for your whereabouts? And Dr. Dixon tells me I was attending surgery in the morning. I had lunch with Ashley, and then I returned to work. And then in the evening, we had sushi at one of our favorite restaurants, and then we came back to my place. So we immediately check with Ashley, and we follow up on the alibi at the restaurant, and it checks out. We were even able to prove it through a credit card receipt. So according to the timeline that we've corroborated, there was no way that Dr. Dixon was in Lubbock to kill Dr. Saunier.
But they may have overlooked.
Dr. Saunier was very heartbroken after his divorce, so he took some time. He was able to get back into the dating game.
Inside the living room of his home, they come across a notebook, a little black book that Dr. Saunier had that listed some of the women he dated and rated the women that he was dating. That's kind of how he enjoyed being a bachelor, was he dated women and sort of had grades for them.
It's Dr. Joseph Saunier's last girlfriend, Rochelle, who now recalls someone else. A woman reached out to Rochelle directly, just months before Joseph was killed.
Got a letter in my mailbox, and it's from this girl who said her name was Tina, and that she met Joseph on the internet, and that they had sex for money.
In that letter, it also accused Dr. Saunier of actually having sex, never paid her for the first encounter that they had.
So here's another person that is very angry with Dr. Saunier, but we have to ask ourselves, is this a motive for murder?
Police in Lubbock, Texas follow up on a poison pen letter from a woman named Tina. Tina wrote that she was an online hookup of murder victim, Dr. Joseph Saunier.
In the letter, this lady does in fact say that Dr. Saunier agreed to pay her for sex, but she's very angry because Dr. Saunier has not kept up his end of the bargain.
Tina was demanding that Dr. Saunier pay up, and Dr. Saunier's girlfriend at the time, Rochelle, was furious about it.
Rochelle confronts Dr. Saunier about this letter, and Dr. Saunier denies any knowledge of whoever this person is or having a sexual encounter for money. He said it was an extortion letter.
He said, this is obviously someone trying to drive a wedge in between us.
If Rochelle is correct, and somebody is in fact out there trying to destroy this relationship, who is it? Where do we need to look? There was no last name associated with Tina. We knew that the letter was postmarked in Lubbock, but there was no return address. We just didn't have a lot to go on. So we start with Dr. Saunier's family and friends. Hey, who is Tina? Have you ever heard of a Tina? A Christina? Anybody of that nature? And they're like, no, we've never heard of that person.
Investigators are stumped, but Rochelle now tells police that Tina is probably a fake name, and she claims to know who the real Tina may be.
Who's this other person that you think could have done this?
Trish Berlongo.
She tells me that
Trish, about 2 weeks before we met, and she wasn't happy about it.
Police follow up with Dr. Saunier's sons to confirm Rochelle's story and get more background on Trish.
Trish had been Dr. Saunier's dance instructor. She ran a dance studio here in Lubbock, and the same dance studio where Dr. Saunier ultimately met Rochelle.
But Dr. Saunier's sons told us that she did not have a good relationship with the family. They did not like the way that she treated Dr. Saunier when they were in public.
They had gone on some dance thing where she misbehaved.
Rochelle tells me that after the relationship ended, at the request of Dr. Saunier, Trish becomes very angry with him. But is that a reason enough to kill?
To find out, police bring in Trish Berlanga for an interview.
Trish voluntarily arrives at the police station, so we ask her, tell me about a letter from Tina. Do you know anything about that? And Trish adamantly denies anything about that letter. She didn't write it. She doesn't know anything about the letter from Tina. Okay, so tell us about your contacts with Dr. Saunier. We know that you call him and you text. And she says, I've barely spoken with him over the past 10 months.
But Rochelle claims that Trish is lying.
She kept calling and calling. And finally, he said, you just need to back off. And she started crying, and she said, I just wish we had another chance.
Trish wanted to get back together. She didn't ever want the relationship to end. Detectives obviously wanted to know where she was at the time of Dr. Saulnier's death, and she tells us that she was in Florida.
We checked that alibi and it checks out. She was in Florida, so there's no way she was in Lubbock to do the murder of Dr. Saulnier.
Trish is now the third suspect to be eliminated. After Dr. Dixon and the emergency room nurse Sharon. And all had been accused by and acquainted with Dr. Saulnier's last girlfriend, Rochelle Shatina.
It seemed like every time the detectives went back and talked to Rochelle, she had a different name. From the outside looking in, we kind of thought maybe she's a little too helpful.
Investigators often find it suspicious when somebody appears too forthcoming, offering multiple names, because perhaps this is a tactic to divert suspicion from themselves.
Police now wonder if Rochelle's been hiding something all along.
And we find out that in the days leading up to the murder, Dr. Saulnier was actually texting friends to figure out, hey, what's the best way I can break up with Rochelle?
She had been pressuring him
to what Rochelle believed and wanted.
He is the love of my life. We were planning on spending our lives together.
After committing years of his life to a marriage, he doesn't want to be exclusive with anybody.
This revelation sheds new light on the last lunch Rochelle had with Dr. Saulnier, just hours before he was murdered.
So there was a possibility that when Dr. Saulnier and Rochelle Shatina had lunch that day, that he might have been breaking up with her.
And we find out the day that he was murdered, he seemed very agitated, and his co-workers asked, why are you so agitated? And he said, I'm trying to end my relationship with Rochelle. I just don't know how to do it.
And soon after, Dr. Saulnier is murdered. Officer Johnson calls Rochelle back to the station. For the first time, she finds out that Dr. Saulnier had planned to split with her on the very day he was killed.
Oh my gosh.
It's information that Rochelle didn't anticipate.
Okay, this surprises me.
That surprises you?
Yes.
Yeah.
She's not really been forthcoming about the relationship. And we know that Dr. Saulnier is slipping out of Rochelle's grasp. The relationship is starting to fade away. So the big question is, could she be trying to lead us off the path that would lead to her being the murderer?
1 week after the murder of prominent doctor Joseph Saulnier, police in Lubbock, Texas now suspect his girlfriend, Rochelle Shatina. But Rochelle strongly denies that she could ever harm the man she loved.
We are able to finally get Rochelle's phone records, and everything that she told us was corroborated by her phone records.
With Rochelle's alibi confirmed, investigators hit another dead end.
Everybody's getting a little frustrated at this point.
But on July 17th, a week after Dr. Saulnier's murder, that frustration turns to hope when a man comes in with a shocking claim.
A man named Paul Reynolds, who told him that his friend had confessed to him that he had killed a doctor in Lubbock.
He couldn't have made it up. He couldn't have freaking made it up.
Paul Reynolds is a nursing assistant and former Green Beret living in Amarillo, Texas.
Paul Reynolds has been staying with his friend, and just within the past couple of weeks or so, his friend's acting really, really strange. And it's enough to make Paul very nervous. And he tells us his name is David Shepard.
This could be a potential suspect.
Paul Reynolds says he became friends with David Shepard 20 years earlier in the Green Berets. But now he fears Shepard has gone off the deep end.
Immediately, I go to the door close. I'm not gonna lie to you, I was like freaked out by the whole thing.
Paul feels like it's necessary for him to take immediate action from the things he's hearing.
Honestly, I'm a little worried. Okay, maybe 20 threats. I have to be part of stopping this. I have to be part of this has to be acted.
Paul is concerned for his own welfare. So he's got to stand up and stop it. We find out that David Shepard is a 51-year-old unemployed salesman from Amarillo. He's got 3 daughters. He was divorced. But the question is, why would an unemployed 51-year-old divorced salesman, why would he want to kill a very successful doctor in Lubbock?
I think money has played a lot into this. Like $12,000 or $11,000 behind his child support.
David Shepard had gone bankrupt a couple of times.
He's financially troubled, was doing all kinds of different things to try to make ends meet, including having Paul Reynolds sleep on the couch, maybe and pay a little rent.
The overriding theme is simple. He can't hold down a job. He's got 3 kids he's got to pay child support on. So, is money a motive here?
But police first need to confirm whether Paul Reynolds' statement is credible. Or is he casting blame upon his friend because Reynolds himself is involved in the murder? There's one way to find out.
If an informer provides a number of details that had never been released to the press or leaked to the press, police know that there is some saliency to this informer's story.
I believe he had been going to Lubbock to watch this man for weeks.
Paul Reynolds tells us that David Shepard had been stalking Sonye for some time. And Rochelle said that there was somebody that she and Dr. Sonye believed to be in Sonye's backyard taking pictures of them.
Now investigators wonder if Rochelle's description of her stalker will match David Shepard.
One of the things that Rochelle had told us is that she had seen a very large man that she felt was stalking her at her gym.
And Paul says, yeah, David's very large. He's a large man.
Paul then recounts David Shepard's alleged final trip to Lubbock on July 10th, the day of the murder. He left Amarillo and drove straight to Dr. Sonye's home.
He was outside the house somewhere.
Paul Reynolds told them that David Shepard parks his car near Dr. Sonye's house, walks around to the backyard, and lies in wait.
The doctor saw Dave and tapped on the window. Like, who are you? What are you doing out there? He also said he pushed the window.
He said he used a plastic bottle to muffle the sound.
Plastic bottle are details of the crime known only to police and to the killer. Officer Johnson is more convinced David Shepard is the likely shooter. But one question remains.
So then we ask him, okay, why? And then Paul tells us, well, David told me he was hired by Dr. Mike Dixon to kill Dr. Sonye.
Mike Dixon was Rochelle Shatina's ex-boyfriend.
It was a break in the case.
Mike Dixon and David Shepard are good friends.
Their relationship puzzles police. How could such different people be such close friends?
One is a well-established plastic surgeon. The other one is a drifter, someone that's on the quick take. And so the relationship seems odd, but it does really begin to have the hallmarks of a true murder-for-hire plot.
So after all of the information that Paul told us, we were certain that we had enough probable cause to obtain an arrest warrant for the arrest of David Shepard.
On July 16th, 2012, 6 days after Dr. Joseph Sonye's homicide, Lubbock police arrest 51-year-old David Shepard for murder. Police secure a warrant to search Shepard's cell phone records for communications with Dr. Dixon.
So we find out through David's cell phone records that he'd been texting with Dr. Dixon for several months and keeping Dr. Dixon apprised of the stalking that David had been doing at Dr. Sonye's house.
And on David Shepard's phone is a picture of the pane window in Dr. Sonye's backyard. But on the glass, you see David Shepard in the reflection on the window.
This picture places him right at the scene right before the crime happens.
Investigators now have all they need to charge the mastermind of the murder, Dr. Michael Dixon.
We arrest Dr. Thomas Michael Dixon and charge him in connection with the murder of Dr. Joseph Sonye.
Dr. Dixon and David Shepard were both charged with capital murder. I made an offer to David Shepard's attorneys that if he cooperated with law enforcement and then ultimately testified against Mike Dixon that we would waive the death penalty.
David Shepard accepts their offer, recounting key details of what led to the murder.
He asked me if I knew of a girl in Lubbock.
David Shepard tells us that Mike Dixon was obsessed with Rochelle Shatina, that he was very angry with her, wanted her back.
She's dumped him and dating another highly successful doctor, and he wanted revenge.
He asked me if I would mind making $1,000 to cause a problem. He pretty much wanted to break up Dr. Sonye and Rochelle.
So you had the perfect storm. You had somebody desperate for money,
that was a stripper in a bar there in Amarillo to write this letter and sign it Tina.
So in the very beginning, they weren't about plotting a murder. They were about driving a wedge between Rochelle and Dr. Saunier, but those ideas never pan out.
So now this plan has escalated to murder.
Dr. Dixon provides him with a .25 caliber weapon, and David tells us that Dr. Dixon paid him in 3 silver bars for the murder. Dr. Dixon already advanced him 1 silver bar, which he traded in for cash, and then on the night of the murder, he provided him 2 more, which he then went and pawned for cash money as well.
Police confirm the sales of the silver bars at the pawn shop. David Shepard's story checks out.
And so we now have the pieces of the timeline of the last 24 hours of Dr. Saunier's life.
So on July 9th at 8:26 p.m., David Shepard sends a message to Dr. Dixon, ready to go south tomorrow. Dr. Dixon replies, "I hope it all goes well."
The following day, Dr. Joseph Saunier arrives at Covenant Medical Center at 10 a.m.
At about 1 o'clock on the day of the murder, Rochelle and Dr. Saunier had gone to lunch, and he had returned back to the hospital.
At 4:45 p.m., David Shepard arrives at Dr. Saunier's house, goes to the backyard, and lies in wait for Dr. Saunier.
Dr. Saunier arrived approximately 7:15 p.m.
But 7:44 p.m., David sends Dr. Dixon a text, "I'll keep you posted." Then all the messaging correspondence stops.
Inside the living room of his home, Dr. Saunier pours himself a drink and looks out the back window of his home.
Dr. Saunier looks outside through a back window and sees David sitting there in his backyard.
David Shepard approaches the window, pushes it down, raises his weapon, and fires 1 time.
David gets inside, shoots 4 more times, and then Dr. Saunier stumbles into the garage where David follows him as Dr. Saunier collapses onto the floor. David goes up to the body, removes an assassin's knife from his bag, and repeatedly stabs Dr. Saunier. Dr. Saunier dies between 7:45 and 8 p.m. And then he leaves, drives to a lake, and throws the murder weapon in a lake.
He ultimately took detectives to that lake, and they were able to find that gun.
It is able to be traced back to Dr. Dixon. David Shepard pleads guilty to the murder and is now serving life in prison.
Mike Dixon was found guilty of...
This case is defined by obsession. It's obsession with money, it's obsession with love, and it's not being able to move on with your life because of your obsession.